Beau was afraid. No, Ruth is afraid to start this video. My god, I didn't say that into this. Shoot. Okay, what I really liked about this movie, which is like, duh, it really hits on every single rational, everyday fear that everybody has once thought of. I really appreciated that. My name is Rusenica. Welcome to my casual YouTube channel. This is where I talk about anything casual or monumental related to life. And today just happens to be a movie, which is called Beau Was Afraid. This is going to include spoilers. I'm going to be unpacking all of the things that stood out to me. This is not like a formal review. Like, I don't sit down and dissect the movie scene by scene, character by character, plot by plot, director note by director's note. A normal person is going to talk about a movie that she enjoys, and I have some notes, but it mainly has to do with the themes of the movie that I noticed. So we're going to be talking about the standout as opposed to summarizing the whole entire movie. So the main themes that I saw in this movie were what Ari Aster himself said. I know I said I was going to be like dissecting this, but I did look at what Ari Aster said about this, who was the director of this movie, who also directed Midsummer, or Midsommar, as some people say. We're in America. And Hereditary, which I have not seen, but I have seen Midsummer. I looked into what he talked about in relation to this film because I wanted to see what the inspiration was behind this. And he said that this movie is about guilt and ambivalence. The themes that I want to dissect are guilt and anxiety, or like anxiety-driven guilt, guilt-driven anxiety, whichever one comes first. Everyone is talking about this. Every single review you're going to see is about, like, oh, surveillance, the idea that we're being surveilled, the idea that anxiety is also driven by surveillance. I want to talk about that a little bit. Relationship dynamics in this movie, because they're very prevalent. But you could also apply that to, like, every movie ever made. The idea of the relationship dynamics does play a large part into the way that the character exists throughout this whole entire movie, and not only exists to us, but like, oh no. On top of relationship dynamics, the relationship that he had with his mom was the main focus of this whole entire thing. So like the narcissism of the parents' relationship, because that dynamic was just a narcissist's portrayal about like the power that she wanted to wield onto him. I swear to God. Speaking of like a fear of surveillance, I'm pretty sure my husband is listening to me or leaving the door open. I hate being watched to listen to anything when I'm making any sort of video, any sort of art, any sort of thing that I have to put my creativity into. It just makes me. The first part is the anxiety and guilt of it all. I thought that this was an extremely immediately I picked up not only on, I mean, like, I didn't pick up on the story and like what was going to happen with the story, but I feel like it really serves a viewer to think about where the director was going in relation to like, what ideas in real life are we like putting into this? Was could he have been putting into this movie that could be explored in a very artistic way? As a creative and as somebody who like could be like a storyteller, like could tell stories, I tell them in like a very direct way. Like I write things down and then I say them the way that I want somebody to take them in. In terms of movies, I feel like sometimes stories don't have like the beginning, middle, and end. A lot of great stories come from very abstract storylines. And this to me felt very abstract, very up to the viewer to decide like how they want to take it. And so one of those themes to me was like the idea of like not only anxiety but just everyday fears and just fears that we all have. And Ari Aster did such a good job. Is that even how you say it? Ari Aster? I really hope that it's Ari Aster. I really liked the idea of like an everyday common fear put into a movie, portrayed in a way that makes you feel panicked, but then between those moments you have comedy and like just such like a, it's such an anxiety thing to like experience a moment of fear, or like if it's rational or irrational to experience that fear and then to like laugh about it like 2 seconds later, whether it be out of nerves or whether it be out of like truly just like this is like not that big a like. Also in the movie, like the moment of where Beau was so afraid that he was gonna get like shot and he was like, I'm I'm resisting the idea of even, I don't know how to properly convey this, but our fears can sometimes be funny when they turn out to like not really be a threat to us at all, because we're looking at that not as like, oh, he's actually gonna die. We're looking at that as like, this doesn't need to like, this is not necessary. It's like sometimes fear just isn't necessary. It's kind of funny. So some of the fears that I had that I would imagine that he was like, I would like to put this into the movie because we've all dealt with that kind of fear, or like we all can relate to that, is like the fear of being watched all the time. Like Beau was constantly surveilled by so many different characters. It makes us very anxious. At least it makes me very anxious just to be watched. Like, you know, that feeling of like, oh my God, somebody's looking at me. Like, that's a terrifying thing. So I like that he put that in there. Another, like, some other common fears are like spiders, which I did not realize was just like one of those things that he probably put in to like put in just fears, common fears, until I sat down and like wrote down all of these things. Being falsely accused of something that we have not done, Beau turning down the music when he wasn't even playing any music, and then that ending up in the neighbor like retaliating and then like playing his own music super loud. Yeah, the idea of being falsely accused. And then also with the falsely accused, there was the much more serious idea that like uh Roger and Grace's daughter was going to like falsely accuse him of like taking advantage of her or something, or like saying like that something happened that it didn't, unless he like smoked joint with them, which is like, oh my God. Fear of being falsely accused of something, as well as just like peer pressure. That's another thing that I should have added to the list, of like the fear of peer pressure and like actually being suckered into trying drugs against your own will. Scary. The fear of disappointing your parent. Fear of being hit by a car, your therapy sessions not only being like talked about by your therapist with somebody else, but like reported to the person who you're mainly talking about. And then discussed in front of you in a critical way. The fear of simply getting too high. A loved one watching you have sex. Oh my God. Oh my God. Also, a parent's death. I should have mentioned that in the like first part. The fear of a parent dying, your own death. But Beau being so afraid that he was gonna die from something as natural as like having sex. Like that's maybe even like also the fear of sex itself, because like I think we all have a little bit of like fear of that idea, but the idea from Beau being like, I'm gonna die from having sex, so funny. Also just a normal fear is just death in general. So I was thinking to myself, is guilt driven by anxiety, or is anxiety driven by guilt? Did I just say the same thing? I have decided on the fact that your guilt is driven by your anxiety, because you have to feel anxious about something in order to feel guilty about it. That's just like my 2 cents on that. And throughout this whole entire movie, you felt so much empathy for Beau, because he truly felt guilty about every single action that he took. And he was so, the word isn't humble, but he was so, this is the person they were watching that life was just happening to him. He was not in control of his life whatsoever. So it made it really hard to just see that this man was just going through life anxiety riddled, guilt ridden, everything. Didn't appear to deserve any of it, which I think was such a good portrayal of, I don't want to say, I was going to say innocence, because like honestly Beau strike me as a very innocent guy, but how guilt and anxiety manifest into our character, because I think a lot of us make decisions from fear. And Beau, like his mother said, I tried to put the fear of the world into you. And you could tell this man was so terrified of the world from the lens of, I would do anything to give my mother, get my mother's approval, even if she's dead. Like, even if she's dead, I have to show up to this funeral. I have to be the best son I can to my dead, demanding, controlling mother. Because I'm scared of just what the consequences are for not doing that, you know? This man was in such a horrible building, and we did not realize that he was just being financially abused until we saw his like mom's amazing, gorgeous, beautiful house. Maybe some other people would have picked up on it earlier than I did, but like it took me a minute. It took me a minute to realize that this woman was like ridiculously wealthy, and it did not make sense for him to live in that horrible, horrible place that he lived in. But it was just because she was abusing him, controlling him, using him as a source for her own validation to like feed her own power, you know? Talk about relationship dynamics now. So the main dynamic in this whole entire movie is Beau and his mom, because she holds all the power and she controlled his life, like surveilled his life, made every single move about his life. I want to say I was watching some reviews related to this movie, but I tried my hardest not to be too informed about other people's views so that I wouldn't be just taking in somebody else's views, internalizing them and like portraying them as my own in my own video. But I feel like not a lot of people are talking about the dynamic that he had with his mother and how it pretty much informed the whole entire movie. Like, that may just be something that stands out to me, like I'm projecting, because I really do feel as a young person, there's so many things about the way that like our parents raised us that we need to work through and like dissect and discuss. But I feel like a lot of the people that I've been watching, and like even the people after I listened, after I watched the movie with my husband went off to the bathroom and these guys were like standing around the theater being like, yo, this movie's just about how Ari Aster, how Ari just like hates his mom. Like, this movie is probably just about how he hates his mom. Like, I mean, I'm going through some things with my mom and like she gives me a hard time, yeah, but like I think this movie's just about like their bad relationship and like I was like, you're so dumb. You're so dumb. It's crazy. These men were just talking about like just not thinking very critically and just kind of just projecting about how he might feel about his own mom, even though they probably like hadn't listened to any interviews. They probably hadn't done like any research into this. They probably hadn't watched the movie for real, hadn't like formed a thought about like what was he trying to say in the relation to the story for the audiences, and like how was he just trying to entertain people, and how is this creative expression, what does this creative expression say about like the way that I internalized it, you know? It's like so embarrassing that a guy could be like, yo, he just like hates his mom. I mean, like, I am talking about it in relation to like, oh, let's talk about the relationship dynamic here and how it was toxic. More so in relationship to how it entertains us and how it has real themes. I think it has real life themes, especially in the way that at the very end of the movie, she hit the nail on the head with all of the things that a typical like mom would say in order to guilt her son, guilt her daughter, guilt her whoever the heck into whatever she wants them to do. Like, I think at a certain point, she said something like, "I didn't raise you to be this way," which is like classic. I don't want to say abuse because I know that well-meaning mothers say this. I didn't raise you to be this way, but it's like you had an idea of what I should be like, and that's on you. That's not on me. You didn't raise me to do anything. Could have guided me to do things, but raised me to? You said, like, I didn't have any love in my heart for you, and I, like, I tried to muster up all the love I could, and still you're ungrateful. I tried to invoke every fear I could into you, and still you make no decisions, you know? Like, it's just very classic abusive mom. Yeah, classic abusive mom, because it like gives no way for him to ever stand up for himself and have the autonomy to make a proper informed decision without it being riddled with guilt. So that's the dynamic that I wanted to talk about. The dynamic that he has with his mother. Oh my god, somebody could write a book on this. Could write a book on the response to the movie. I could straight up write a book on this. Also, the fear that she tried to invoke in him, just by the idea, also with the idea of like, I'm going to make you so scared to ever have sex that I'm going to tell you about how your father died from sex and your father's father died from sex, which is crazy. Such a mama's boys and mama behavior. There is the idea of mothers not being able to like let their sons just live the life that they want to live, and all of this is like extremely exaggerated. It also reigns true to like a lot of the themes that like mothers will just be so threatened by the women that their sons try to pursue, and it's like, why would you be so threatened by that? Like, just because you can't be the only woman in their life. Like, ew, my God, ew. Yeah, I just thought it was so interesting. But it was like so disgusting. That relationship dynamic is just for the idea of I want to control this person. He's easily controlled, and that is their dynamic. And their dynamic like informs the way that Beau moves throughout the world, because it was like essentially just him and his mom like living, and that is also informs the dynamic of like single parents and their children as well. Also, this is just like me. I could be making this up, projecting, but I just felt like, because I feel like a common theme of single parents is just it's me and my kid against the world, but that also is like, let's look at the abuse of what that could mean. You can't be your parents' only happiness. You can't feel so afraid of your own independence that it disappoints them to where every single action you take is in relation to how scared you are of not making them happy. But that's what happened. I'm gonna stop talking about that because it could just go on to like things that are very unrelated very quickly. The dynamic between his therapist and him, I know that wasn't a largely hit on theme until the end, because it was kind of like, oh shoot, your therapist was reporting directly to your mom. That's crazy. That's wildly, that's just insane. But I think also that the idea of anxiety playing into that is interesting, because I feel like there are some people who even lie to their therapist because they want their therapist to approve of them, which I think is also another theme of anxiety in this. Because when when the therapist asked, like, do you ever want your mom to like die? And Beau was like, no. Or at least I don't think that we saw the answer. But I think there was a lack of honesty with his therapist, and I felt that like from the beginning, because it was almost like, why aren't you just like open and honest? Because you feel a little bit strained here, Beau. One of the most important dynamics that I think was like a kind of a crucial part into this movie that was a little bit weird too was Grace and Roger. And Grace, I also didn't realize, was played by Amy Ryan, and Amy Ryan played Holly in The Office, which is wild. I like was looking at her the whole time. I was like, who the heck is she? Who the heck is she? And that's my husband. I finally was like, who is she? Like, and he was like, The Office. And I was like, my God, crazy. So Roger, then also shout out Pepper, Modern Family, but they're much more than their original characters. They are, and they delivered such a good story. But Roger, Grace, and their son, who is no longer there, I think speaks to the idea of like a son's power in a family dynamic, but not only a son's power, but what grief can do and manifest its way unhealthily into people who are toxically and anxiously attached. I can't speak much on this without feeling like very bad, because the story was about how their son died, and he was a veteran, I'm pretty sure, or he died in combat. I can't remember. But what I can speak on is the idea that like the grief and the toxic attachment manifested its way unhealthy into that family, and then it took them into taking in like a veteran who needs to be in a mental institution. Not a joke. This is like a movie. This is like not real. A veteran who needs to be in a mental institution, who like they should not be in care of, and leads them to neglecting their daughter, which I felt like meant something. I really do feel like it meant something. Especially because there was this one, I watched a psychologist talk about this movie, and he was talking about the prominence of the blue paint versus the green. Yeah, green is for girl and blue is for boy. It could be. I don't. It feels offensive to even say simple things like that. Pink and blue. When the girl like drowned herself in paint and died, killed herself with paint. How she swallowed the blue paint, probably because she wanted to be accepted as like the son was accepted and loved, instead of being like rejected heavily and neglected. That I feel like has so many layers that I don't even feel qualified to speak on, because there was a lot of themes of veterans being mishandled in this and being kind of used as pawns, mainly for the actress, because she like opened up this clinic or facility for the veterans and then just neglected and abused and used them, probably for her own image. But yeah, I don't know. It was very interesting. I just felt like that was an interesting story that has very real things. Anyway, there was this one quote that I heard about a while ago on a podcast. Amanda Seales brought this up, or maybe Amanda Seales' guest brought this up, and it was the quote that speaks to like the mother-son relationship, and it was like, why do mothers raise their daughters but love their sons? And I was like, wow. Because why? Like, yeah, what? There's a bunch of mama's boys. There's no mama's. There's not a lot of mama's girls. Like, what the heck? Um, and I just was thinking about that throughout this movie because I was like, that is very interesting. You're like just fine to let Beau take your daughter's room even though you guys have a spare room. Your husband makes big money and you're just gonna like let your daughter sleep on the couch and pop pills like they're popcorn. What? Also, the dynamic between Elaine and Beau, I think that also speaks to the anxiety of what if I never get to pursue the person that I'm heavily, deeply interested in ever. And that I'm so afraid of giving into any sort of desire, so much so because I'm scared that it'll kill me because that's what my mom said it was going to do. The whole Elaine thing, so weird. But yeah, that I think was interesting because the dynamic is there's always going to be this push and pull between him and his idea of Elaine. So much so to where like so much so I keep saying that, yuck, to where he sees Elaine on the news. I think that was Elaine, and he throws up. The anxiety of even seeing somebody who you had very deep feelings for after like a couple days on a cruise ship, I thought was really funny. Yeah, I think there's the idea of like unrequited love or lost love, surveillance. I didn't hit on it, but I think that a large part of what drives guilt and fear and anxiety is the idea that people will judge. I feel like most of the time, if I make a mistake, I can take that mistake, internalize it, heal from it, whatever, much quicker if I'm not being watched. But the idea of being watched and being surveilled makes it 10 times worse. Drives anxiety. Drives it. Versus if I like fail alone and I like make a mistake by myself that I can only witness, like I'll heal in half the time it would take me unless I was being surveilled. If I wasn't being surveilled. Yeah, because we're all terrified of other people's judgment, especially when that judgment it comes from the people that we love. The last scene, wow, was amazing because it mimicked no, it was way too long. Let me say that. I should put this at the beginning. I'm gonna put this at the beginning. The movie was too long, okay? It was like, it could have been shortened by like 30 to 40 minutes, I think. But at the same time, who am I to critique a director for including things that I didn't deem as necessary or entertaining when like I couldn't have thought of this at all. You know what I mean? And that's another thing that I have critique for is people who critique movies like this, I feel like don't think about it in a very critical, appreciative way because there was so much to dissect here. There was so much value. There were so many like appropriate real messages in it that I feel like some people just weren't looking hard enough. But also I'm projecting from one creative to another, Mr. Ari Aster. From one creative to another. Crazy. But yeah, the last scene was a little too long. Yeah, it was interesting that the scene mimicked because like we're all watching Beau and there are people in like the theater of the thing, just like watching him drown, and then he drowns, and then like everybody gets up and leaves. It was so interesting as a person in the theater to be sitting there and watching people get up and leave and being like, should I get up and leave? Like, is that what's meant to happen? I think it is. We are mimicking what's on the screen. I don't have many critiques for this movie other than the fact that it was maybe 30 to 40 minutes too long. That is my feeling on Beau is Afraid. If you want, the next video I'm coming out with is about sex and Christianity, just my experience with sex as a Christian, like before I got married and after. And if you want to stick around and watch that, it's coming out like in the next couple days. So, yeah.